Chris, Kathy, Lachlan. I had no idea that Chris had so many admirers. Now, this is the end of the long goodbye to the longest-serving editor-in-chief. Now, when Chris took over the paper as editor-in-chief, you'll recollect that, shortly after European settlement, I invited him home for dinner, and he said to me, "What's your advice on how I should run the paper?" Well, what an opportunity that was to give the young boy a few tips. I said, "Mate, it's very simple. Very, very simple. There are 3 golden rules. Intimidate the management, bust the budget, and fuck the politicians." Now, I said to him, "Do this and you can't go wrong." I mean, it never remotely occurred to me that he'd actually take the advice on all 3 counts. Now, before I continue, and this is not going to be the Gettysburg Address tonight, before I continue, there are a number of important messages that have been conveyed to me by people who would love to have been here. The first is from Malcolm Turnbull. It reads, and I want to get the words here exactly correct, I quote, "There has never been a more exciting time to work at the Australian." Isn't he original? Now, when Malcolm handed me this message personally at lunchtime today, I said, "PM, this message is very ambiguous. Is it exciting because Chris is leaving or because Boris is arriving?" Malcolm gave me a big smile and said, "I like to see agility in a newspaper." The second message is from New York. It's from a family friend of Chris's, Riley's godfather, otherwise known as Kevin Rudd. It reads, "Chris, I'm running for Secretary General of the UN. Where are you when I need you?" Very pertinent question. It'll be prescient too, I can assure you. Now, the third message is from a redhead, a very close friend of Kevin Rudd. Julia Gillard writes, and I quote, "Darling, you said you were never embarrassed at getting close, very close, to people in power. Darling, what happened when I was Prime Minister? And why did you bring that terrible Paul Kelly to dinner at the lodge and spoil our chances?" Now, the fourth message is also from New York, from the boss. It's been phoned through to me from Rupert Murdoch, and it suggests, frankly, I think that Chris could be in a fair bit of trouble. It reads, and I quote, "Chris, I want to revisit this issue. How on earth did you persuade me to support Kevin Rudd at the 2007 election? You said he would be a good Prime Minister. Please, have yet another go at explaining this." Now, I've got a stack of other messages, but look, it'd be too much fun to read them all out. So let me just make a few comments about Chris. As you all know, he's the longest serving editor-in-chief in the paper's 51-year history. His innings has been Bradman-esque. He's been a warrior, fearless in his judgments, guided by intellectual conviction, and truly dedicated to the masthead. His achievements are substantial, and often we can tend to overlook them. First, Chris has made The Australian the most important and influential paper in the country. Now, this is a very difficult task for a national broadsheet. If you'd said to people in the industry or in politics 30 years ago that a paper like The Australian, with its then relatively small market share, would become the most influential paper, they would have laughed. But it happened, and much of this is because of Chris. Secondly, Chris has helped to transform the company's view of the paper. I've got to be very careful about this section of the speech, of course, but you can be rest assured it's all the honest truth. The Australian became our corporate flagship. It wasn't once, but it did gain this standing. And much of that is because of Chris. He was a very powerful advocate for the paper inside the company, sometimes taking extraordinarily, even reckless risks in a series of power contests where he chanced his arm big time, occasionally putting his own job on the line. Third, Chris understood and reinterpreted, as every editor must, Rupert Murdoch's originating mission for The Australian, that it exists to challenge, change and improve the country. If you want neutrality, don't buy The Australian. If you want the status quo, don't buy The Australian. The values The Australian stands for, and Chris deeply understood this, are its own. They've been developed, refined and reinterpreted over the years. Its real commitment is to the country and to change the country for the better. This is the beating heart of the paper. It's the key to the paper's character, the passions it inspires and the deep hostility that it provokes. Chris understood The Australian is not the paper of any political party. It never has been from the time Rupert set it up. It judges Labor and Liberal according to its own values. Chris believed in that famous declaration carried on page 1 of the first issue. The paper is tied to no party, to no state, and has no chains of any kind. This is the philosophy of Rupert, it's been the philosophy of Lachlan, and it's been given great honour by Chris during his long time in the chair. He's challenged every government he's covered. John Howard, Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard, Kevin Rudd, there he goes yet again, Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull would have been the same. Chris allowed no compromise to the pursuit of the weakness in every administration we've seen in this country and made that a hallmark of his paper. In conclusion, Chris was a veteran editor who retained his youthful vigour. He loved the paper and he loved the job of editor. Of course, over the years, the job changed. In the old days when I was editor-in-chief and we were younger and wilder, we used to finish up and then go down to Chinatown and dine till 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning. But of course, things have got a little more sedate since then and people have settled down and become a lot calmer. But Chris always led from the front. He pushed, prodded, drove and demanded. Internally, he was very critical, wanting everyone to be better, sometimes pushing people too hard, always keen to avoid complacency. But externally, he was a fierce defender of all the reporters, all the stories, and the integrity of the paper. Chris was a most unusual combination. He had a born instinct for news, combined with a deep commitment to ideas. Under Chris, the paper was number 1 for news and number 1 for ideas. I've spent much of the past 30 years working closely with Chris. I thank him for that partnership in its various dimensions. I thank him for his commitment to The Australian in the discharge of his responsibility to the company, to the staff and to the nation. I'm certain that he'll have a wonderful time in future years, spending more time with Kathy and the kids and discovering his own future ventures. Chris, all the best, mate. I've enjoyed every moment of it. You've done a wonderful job. Thank you.
That's all. Well done.